Welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. As a human, you have a job to do. In fact, you have 4 jobs: to earn and manage money, to attain and maintain health and fitness, to build and sustain personal relationships, to find meaning and make a difference. None of these jobs are taught in school, and that is what this podcast is designed to do: to educate us all on living our most fulfilled lives through the mastery of these 4 jobs. I'm your host, Dr. Jade, Teta, and I believe we are here living this life for 3 reasons, and 3 reasons only: to learn, to teach, and to love. In this podcast, I will be learning, teaching, and loving right along with you. I'm grateful to have your company. Here's to our next level. What's going on, everybody? This is Dr. Jade Teta. I am your host of the show, and welcome to the Next Level Human podcast. Now, if you went on Google and you searched the number 1 thing in personal development that people are needing help with, what do you think it would be? I've done this recently, and that's why I'm doing this podcast. And the first thing that comes up, if you go into Google Keyword Tools, which is a tool that allows you to look at what people are needing help with, you will see that one of the first things that come up, if you put in how to blank and you start scrolling down, you'll get a lot of answers like how to change a tire, how to change your oil, how to do, how to work with Word and, Excel and different things like that. But if you keep scrolling down, you eventually get to the personal development issues. And the first 2 that pop up is one is how to stop overthinking. And the other is how to stop procrastinating. And these are somewhat linked, but we are going to cover this idea of overthinking in today's episode because it's a really big one. And it goes with another huge issue it's highly related with, which is anxiety. And so let's begin to talk about overthinking. Overthinking is not really the problem. It is your reaction to overthinking that is the problem. So let me explain this really quickly. Many people overthink. Many people have things flying through their head all the time, and they simply move on from it, and they don't overthink about overthinking. And so oftentimes our brains will attach to particular things, and then it becomes an issue. Let me give you an example of this. Let's say that you have an itch on your leg, and you're sitting there and you're focusing on the itch. And the more you focus on the itch, what happens? The more you focus on it for a time, it gets more and more intense, doesn't it? And part of the reason that it's becoming more and more intense is because you believe that you need to solve this, and you know how to solve it, you believe. All you have to do is reach down and scratch it. Now, if you've ever had something like this happen where you have a scratch in the middle of your back somewhere where you actually can't reach it and you don't have anybody to scratch it for you, what are some of the techniques that you will use? Well, if you focus on it too much, it's going to become agonizing. You're going to start squirming around a little bit. It's going to become really a problem if you are focusing on it in a way that I need to solve it. Another way to think about this is try to distract yourself. I'll think about something else other than the itch in the middle of my back, and invariably you come back to that. There's another way to solve it, though, and that is this idea that it is not an itch, that this itch is interesting in some other way, that you begin to really look at it, where it is. Oh, it's right in the middle of my back, slightly to the right. Isn't it interesting how an itch actually feels like it's pain? What is it trying to tell me? And if you really just go in and begin to try to have a conversation with this itch, instead of trying to solve the itch begins to change in some way. And if you've ever tried this with something like a headache or an itch or something like this, it oftentimes, not always, will go away. And so that's how come I say oftentimes the issue with overthinking is not that you're overthinking, it's that you're reacting to overthinking as something that you need to stop instead of reacting to overthinking as a symptom, a sign, an opportunity to learn something about yourself. Which brings me to the next aspect of overthinking, which is that a lot of people who tend to overthink, part of the problem is that they have a story about life that forces them to overthink. Now, let me break this down for you. And oftentimes this comes from childhood development. So let's say that early in your childhood, you had an anxious parent, someone who was very anxious and worried about money or about the way they looked to the outside world or about their physical appearance or about their health or about controlling what you do, whether you're making messes or making good grades or your haircut is appropriate or you have the right clothes on or you're behaving appropriately in front of other people. If you've ever had a parent like this or a sibling like this, but especially a parent, then you can know that you can become hyper vigilant. The story becomes that you are not okay and you always need to be on the lookout for solving the problem. If you can solve the problem first, maybe it won't trigger their anxiety, which then triggers your anxiety. But now as an adult, you don't look at it as something that happened in your childhood or this developmental issue. And you don't look at it like, oh, there's a story underneath this. The story of, I need to make everyone like me, or I need to make the right decision. Otherwise, I'm going to go broke and not have safety and security. Or I need to make the right decision because I will not be accepted or belong. Or if I don't make the right decision, I'm going to lose control. And oftentimes when we think about overthinking and the anxiety that can come with it, the big issues with it are usually control. Control is a big issue with anxiety and overthinking. You overthink because you're trying to gain control. And overthinking is a problem because you're trying to gain control, in the same way that an itch in the middle of your back is a problem because you're trying to solve it in some way. And oftentimes what happens there is lack of clarity is a big issue as well. And this oftentimes has to do with the fact that you can't control other people's perceptions and you can't control the future. And so you have a lack of clarity about how people might behave towards you if you make one decision, or what might happen to your safety and security, your money situation, your health situation, if you make a different decision. And so overthinking is really about these aspects. This is the first thing that I want to draw your attention to. And I want to make this more tangible by giving you some real world examples from my life. And so let's do a recent one where in the last, this must have been, 5 years ago now, maybe 6. I was on a cross country road trip, which I used to do a lot, driving from Los Angeles back to North Carolina. And I decided that I had never really hiked the Grand Canyon or been to the Grand Canyon, never really seen it. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to drive up to the Flagstaff area, stay in Flagstaff, and then get up early and go for a hike through the Grand Canyon. And for those of you who know the Grand Canyon, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but it was the South Kabaib Trail that I went on. And it was the middle of the summer. And of course, I looked at the hike, and there was 2 hikes down this mountain, because it's basically a reverse mountain, right? You start the hike going downhill, and then you got to come back up. And so the downhill hike was 1.5 miles to the first point and 1.5 miles back up. That was 3 miles. And to me, I'm thinking to myself, 3-mile hike, that's not an issue at all. Let me do the 6-mile one, the one where it's 3 miles down and 3 miles back up. Because in my head, I'm thinking, 6 miles, whatever. Long story short, the day before, as I'm driving across country, I'm fasting as I normally do, drinking a ton of water, not realizing that I'm setting myself up for some big issues when I go hiking. Partly because I'm not well fed. My glycogen stores are depleted. I'm also probably hyponatremic, low sodium, because I've been drinking, 2 gallons of water probably while I'm in the car the day before. The other fatal mistake I make is I wake up early, or I don't wake up early rather, and I start the trail late. So without going through all the details, long story short, I am halfway through this hike, not even turning around to go back up, and I start to get into heat exhaustion and get in big trouble there and have essentially a near-death experience where luckily I got found by a ranger, and they got me off, the mountain and out of there. Very scary. But the reason I bring this up is that now I have a fear of hiking. And you might laugh at that, but you might be like, what do you mean you have a fear of hiking, Jade? Whenever I go out on a hike now by myself, whether there's people around or not, especially when it is hot, I will start to have a panic attack. My mind is fine, but my body begins to react in panic because it has a body memory of that very traumatic near-death experience in the Grand Canyon. And so what I'm illustrating here is that all of a sudden, my body and my mind, when this begins to kick in, begin to overthink, begin to go in anxiety, and it's all linked to a past issue, a past trauma. I'm wanting to control the situation, and I wrongly think I'm out of control. And this can lead to panic, and post-traumatic stress is really what it is. And I would argue that overthinking is a form of post-traumatic stress. We are just not aware of the stories that happen in our childhood development that make us prone to overthinking. Now, another example is my old fear, which I now have control over, of airplanes. And what I realized is that I would get on an airplane and begin to freak out. And partly I used the approach that I'm going to teach you in this podcast of, instead of always freaking out, I began to, instead of trying to avoid the itch, I started to pay close attention to the itch. I just started to pay attention to, why do I have this nauseous feeling? Why do I feel like I need to take a shit? Why is my brain running a million miles an hour? And also, funnily enough, I'm sure you guys can relate to this, and I apologize, but I'm very open on these podcasts. But one of the things that happens when I get nervous is I feel like I have to have a bowel movement, right? I feel like many people will have this. And then of course you're on a plane. And so that stresses me out further. And so I started to pay attention to the fact that, what is it really about? If I was sitting at home alone in a chair and I started feeling nauseous, I'd be fine. Or if I started feeling like I had to go to the bathroom, I'd be fine. Or if I started feeling any which way, I'd be fine. So what was really the issue? What was I reacting to? And what I was reacting to is that I was out of control, that someone else got to say, you have to get up. When I tell you to get up, you have to put your seatbelt on. You can't move. You're under my control. And so once I started realizing it was a control issue, and that instead of overthinking and getting all worried about all these things, am I going to be able to use the bathroom? Am I going to be out of control? How long is it going to be before we take off? When is the pilot going to turn the seatbelt on? What was that? The seatbelt sign off. What was that bump? Why are we hitting so much turbulence? All these things. I basically just learned to look at my reactions as a control issue, and that just coming to the conclusion that I'm not in control. And this is a time for me to practice mindfulness and the fact that I'm not in control, and it's okay. And sometimes even it's nice to have someone else be in control, tell you when to get in line, tell you what to do, and I can just relax. There's nothing that I need to do, and there's nothing I can do. And that helped me get over my fear of airplanes. And the final anecdote I'll tell you is recently my sister was telling me about one of her friends, because we were talking about anxiety. It's another reason why I'm doing this particular podcast. And what I was explaining is, I was like, look, what people don't understand is that anxiety and overthinking that comes along with that is almost always a result of the inability to choose, make a choice, and or the inability to own a choice. And she's like, well, I don't quite understand that, my sister. She goes, because I have a friend who gets on the highway and freaks out about making left-hand turns. And so this particular friend will drive all over the place to avoid making left-hand turns. It's sort of like an OCD or an obsessive compulsive disorder. And this person will freak out and get like a panic attack if they have to make a left-hand turn. You know how it is where you pull up to a light, you got the green light, but there's cars coming the other direction and you have to pull out in the middle of the intersection and wait till they go so you can make your left-hand turn. Well, this was freaking out this individual. And she's like, how is that the inability to make a choice? And I'm like, it's literally the inability to make a choice, right? Because she literally can't make the left-hand turn. She's literally not able to make that choice and instead will make a different choice. Right-hand turns, right-hand turns, right-hand turns until she gets where she wants to go. She's either going straight or right hand. I'm like, it's literally the inability to make the choice to go left. And so the idea here is with overthinking is that you want to realize that it's closely linked to control. It's closely linked to also clarity, not understanding what is going on with all the elements. And this idea of, I don't know if I make this choice, how bad is it going to get, right? And getting caught up in this. And ultimately, in the end, when we think about this scratch on the back, what is that really about? It's about not looking at what it can teach you, but again, trying to exert control. Okay, jumping in real quick because I have something that I am crazy excited about that's been something in the works for a while now. And this is the Dr. Jade chatbot. You might say, what is that? Well, you all know ChatGPT, you probably know Bard AI and all the AI models, these large language models that are trained on the entire internet that you can now go to and say, hey, write me a program, or hey, give me some advice on this, or hey, give me some issues around getting over breakups or dealing with hard things in my life. Well, essentially, I have had a team over the last several months take all of my information, tens of thousands of data points from all of my programs going all the way back 20 years ago, to all of my books, to all of my blog posts and social media posts, to all of my podcasts. All of this information has been plugged in to a large language model that is trained on my material, so that when you use the Dr. Jade chatbot, you can say, hey, Jade, what do I do for menopause? Hey, Jade, what do I do when I'm going through a breakup? Hey, Jade, can you write me a 12-week program complete with diet? And it's going to be trained on my material in the ways that I do things, as it pertains to fat loss, as it pertains to muscle gain, as it pertains to personal development, as it pertains to career and finance, as it pertains to personal relationships, right? All of these kinds of things, purpose and meaning, all the next level human material, all the Dr. Jade material, everything in the genres of mindset, muscle, and metabolism that you get on this podcast are in this chatbot. And you get to carry it around with you wherever you go. And one of the things I'm committed to doing with the Next Level Human business is allowing you to pay what you want for these services. Some people can pay more because you have the resources. Some people don't, and they pay less. So you can pay as little as $2 per month for this chatbot. Of course, if you can pay more, please pay more, because then you're being the next level human who allows people to pay much less. But for as little as $2 per month, you get to essentially have me in your pocket as your personal health coach and metabolism assistant. If you're interested in getting the chatbot, all you have to do is go to drjade.com/chat, drjade.com/chat, and you can get the Dr. Jade Teta chatbot and begin working with me in your pocket every single day for as little as $2 a month. I hope you will check it out. Let me know how you do with it, and let's get back to the show. So, how do we then deal with this? Let's get into the to-dos of how to deal with overthinking. And we covered a couple already, but let's just review them. Well, the first thing is to uncover the story. What actually happened? What is it that happened? In other words, if I didn't go back and look and say, why is it that every time I go on a hike now, something that I used to love and look forward to, I get nervous and anxious and my body freaks out. Even though my mind wants to go on the hike, my body starts having all these weird body feelings. My heart's racing, all this stuff. What happened? Now, what I could do is I could try to distract myself, deny that it's happening, push through, just avoid going hiking and being like, well, hiking isn't for me anymore. Or I could go back and look and be like, what happened? Now, in my case, it's relatively recent, 5-6 years ago. I know what happened. You know what happened. It makes sense to me. But in smaller things like habitual anxiety and habitual overthinking, we don't know exactly what happened. And we have to go back to our childhood and look, how was my mother? How was my father? Did I even have a mother or a father? Who were my caretakers? What were my siblings doing? How was I reacting at school? What were the things expected of me, the things I expected of myself? What was going on? And a lot of this will come down to something that I talk about in this podcast a lot, that in childhood development, we have two major needs that we need to deal with. First is safety and security issues. So between the ages of 0 to 10 years old, we are very concerned with safety and security. So anytime someone is telling you you're not good enough, you need to be better, you're going to be punished, this is a safety and security challenge. And everyone reacts to this a little differently. So you have to go back and look and say, how is my safety and security challenged? And if my safety and security was challenged, how do I feel out of control in my life? And why? What are those stories, right? Also, we have between the ages of 10 and 20 years old, our teenage years, where it's all about acceptance and belonging. Fear of judgment, fear of not fitting in, fear of being an outcast or ostracized. And then the overthinking that comes along with that. How should I dress? How should I do my hair? Oh my gosh, people didn't like these pairs of shoes. Like, they made fun of my accent. Am I too overweight? Am I pretty enough? Am I attractive enough? Where's my place? All of this, if it gets stuck in your psyche, leads to overthinking and anxiety. And rest assured that psychologically speaking, you might be 20 years old now, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50, 60, 70s, all the way up to 80s. But if you never paid close attention to your childhood traumas and your childhood patterns and the way that you were brought up and how your stuck development has influenced the way you think, feel, choose, and act, then you have missed something. This is one of the reasons personal development, self-development is so important. And so you want to first sit and go, how was my childhood, 0 to 10, and these issues around safety and security and control? How was my adolescence, 10 to 20, and these issues around acceptance and belonging? And to what degree did I feel like I was safe and secure, that I was accepted and I belonged? And to what degree did I focus on trying to fix that through being hypervigilant, anxious, and not knowing, having clarity about who to be? Now, that's the next part I want to talk about here, because not only do you need to uncover the stories, you need to also uncover the choices that you are struggling with. Because the fact that I have an issue with hiking, or an issue with airplanes, or even an issue with being a driver with someone, being a passenger when someone else is driving, I can look at all these patterns and go, what's the common denominator? It's control. Why am I stressed out about being out on a hike when no one is around, or even when people are around? It's that I can't control. What if my body does something I can't control? My legs lock up the way they did when I was in the Grand Canyon, right? If someone else is driving, what if a car comes and I can't, get out of the way because I'm not in control? And so it tells me I'm not in control. And so these issues that you struggle with, it's in the patterns. So you pay attention to the repeated patterns, the stuck emotions, the circumstances, the signs, the symptoms, and you will uncover that, okay, it's not just overthinking and anxiety. It's overthinking and anxiety when there's financial issues. It's overthinking and anxiety when there's issues centered around romance or career or the way other people see me and perceive me. There is overthinking and anxiety around health and fitness choices and my health concerns. There's overthinking and anxiety because I feel lonely and I don't know how to find meaning and purpose in my life. So I always like to think about it. The 4 jobs that you listen to every single time you listen to this podcast, you hear that we have jobs to do. As humans, I think we have 4: career/finance, health/fitness, personal relationships, and romantic relationships, and purpose and meaning. And so what you want to do is go, where does the overthinking happen? Does it happen around finance? That would be a safety and security issue. Does it happen around personal relationships? That would be an acceptance and belonging issue. Does it happen around health and fitness? That would be a safety and security issue. Does it happen around purpose and meaning in my life? This would be a choice around freedom and autonomy and feeling like I matter and I make a difference. And so paying attention to the overthinking is critical. Okay, let's take a brief break. I want to tell you about a product that I was heavily involved in that is now available for you. And this is metabolic super protein. Up until this point, people who bought my programs, Metabolic Renewal, Metabolic Aftershock, Metabolic Prime, they were the only individuals who can get metabolic super protein, the protein that we designed when I was with metabolic.com. Now, I'm no longer with metabolic.com. However, this is the best protein, in my opinion, on the market. And so despite the fact that I'm no longer with metabolic.com, I still think this is the best protein for you to use. It's the best tasting. It's a mix of collagen and whey protein. It is very easy on the gut. We did everything when I was at Metabolic to make this the best protein available on the market. And Metabolic Super Protein is now available for all of you. And I still have a special deal for you based on my involvement with metabolic.com in the past. And so you can get a special deal on your first try of Metabolic Super Protein. This is the protein I use every day. I actually use it in my coffee, make a nice coffee protein latte. I've been doing that for the last several months, and I'm absolutely loving it. But I also add it to a lot of other things, including taking it whenever I am having cravings. I especially like to use it at the end of the day when I've had my dinner and I'm needing a taste of something else, and I just want to shut off those cravings and that hunger that are the thing that keeps me from getting results, because I can be a big eater at night if I'm not careful. Metabolic Super Protein is the protein that you want to use. If there was one thing that I could tell you to do diet-wise to help you lose fat, maintain muscle, and regain your health and optimize your metabolism, it would be increasing your protein intake. It is the best thing that you can do. Definitely try Metabolic Super Protein. You will not be disappointed, I promise you. To get Metabolic Super Protein, go to drjade.com/protein deal. drjade.com/protein deal. And you will get a deal on Metabolic Super Protein, and you can try it. I am convinced this is going to be your best and most favorite protein you have ever tried. drjade.com/protein deal. And let's get back to the show. And so let's get through then one of the techniques here that I'll talk about first, which is a mindfulness technique. And it's a technique of dissociating. And it will bring us right back to that itch that you have. Now, a lot of people are not used to this unless you've done mindfulness training. But the ability to ignore an itch, right, is a skill that everyone should learn. And it's not something that we ever talk about. Most people, they get an itch, they scratch it. It's automatic. And if you're not used to mindfulness training, when you get an itch, you will immediately scratch it. And if you can't scratch it, it becomes agonizing and it starts to dominate your thought. And what do? You start overthinking about the itch. And so the itch is a micro example of bigger overthinking issues. And so what you want to practice doing with that itch is you want to practice dissociating and essentially saying, this is not my body. this is not even an itch. What is this? Oh, that's so interesting that it is a little hot. It's a little cold. It almost feels like pain. Oh, isn't that interesting? Now I have an itch somewhere else. What's that itch like? I wonder what this is all about. And you basically become someone who is a watcher. This may sound very familiar to you for mindfulness training. What do you do when you're doing mindfulness? The typical example is you're paying attention to your breath. And this is a good way to do this as well, where you essentially go, I'm just going to dive into other body sensations. And so you start paying attention to the itch, but then you go, isn't this interesting? What other sensations am I feeling? Well, my body's breathing. That's an interesting sensation. I've got pain in my knee, that arthritis. That's an interesting sensation. Oh, I can feel my socks on my feet and my bedroom slippers on my feet. I can feel the shirt on my shoulders. Interesting. I can hear cars going by. And all of a sudden, instead of being engaged in this itch and overthinking with this itch, you're just interested in all the different experiences you're having. And you lose sight of the fact that you are a body and an identity for a little while. And this becomes a skill. You can begin to do this where you essentially move into the realm of mindfulness, detachment, or what some people might call nothingness, where it's basically to say, I am not really this body. I am simply energy experiencing other energy. And this itch and this breath and this weight from the shirt and clothes on my back are all just energetic inputs. And aren't they interesting? And ironically, in that process, the itch goes away. Now take that example with the overthinking. So now you're overthinking about something. You can begin to just simply ask questions. This is interesting. I'm overthinking this. What is this about? What is the story? I wonder if other people think like this. I'm just energy experiencing this. What is this experience telling me? Where do I feel it in my body? You get the point, right? And so this is one of the first things you can try. And when overthinking is mild and anxiety is fairly mild, this can work incredibly well. Incredibly well. Now, the other thing that you can begin to do as this ramps up from mild to more moderate in intensity is you can try breathing techniques. And there's two types of breathing techniques here. One breathing technique is a relaxing technique. Oftentimes when you begin to overthink, it oftentimes means you're overstimulated in your sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. We all know what this is like. We could probably trigger overthinking in ourselves if we drank a gallon of coffee, right? You know what that's like when the body's just go, 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 right? So you can calm the sympathetic nervous system sometimes, especially when it's mild to moderate overthinking or anxiety, with slow breaths. And especially slow exhales. Now, the most common technique is what's called the 4-7-8 technique. So it is a 4-second inhale, a 7-second hold at the top, and an 8-second long exhale. So it basically sounds like this. Hold. And then and you're doing this through the nose. I'm just breathing through my mouth so you can hear me. So it's big breath in. It's 7-second count in your head. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then long exhale. Out. And you basically do that for 10 breaths or so, and this can dramatically calm you. This is also a great technique, by the way, if you feel like when you go to bed, your mind's kind of wandering. You can go into this 4-7-8 breath technique. 4-7 inhale or 4-second inhale, 7-second hold, 8-second exhale for 10 breaths or so. And oftentimes you are deeply in a relaxed state and you're no longer overthinking. And you can amplify this a little bit further by when you do the 8-second out, you can do a little hum like relaxing, and or just tell yourself calmly, relax, right, as you breathe out. Now, what a lot of people don't understand is that sometimes when this overthinking gets too much, right? It starts to get intense, that the 4-7-8 breathing and trying to relax yourself is just not going to do it. And this is where you can actually go with the intensity. I oftentimes like to think, if you're in a severe situation, and I like to think of a dog, right? If a dog attacks you and starts biting you, the best approach is not to pull away. The best approach is to shove your arm or that body part into the dog's mouth to choke it so it releases you, right? If you can imagine, what most people will do is they'll start trying to pull away. And this just makes the dog come harder. So what you want to do if a dog is biting your forearm, let's say, is you want to shove that forearm down the dog's throat. So the next technique here is similar to that. If you're in sympathetic mode, we humans are designed evolutionarily to respond to a sympathetic crisis with fight or flight. And so you can use a breathing technique that is more of a fight or flight technique. And the one I'll teach you here is something called billows breath. And so what you can do is you essentially breathe in, throw your arms up in the air, and then let your arms fall down by your side and breathe out. And it's sort of a fast, hyperventilating breath. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see me do it. I'm going to do it right now. You basically have your hands up by your shoulders, loose fists, and your fists are sort of in front of your shoulders. You breathe in and your arms go up overhead, like your arms are up, and then you just let your arms fall and out, right? And so it basically looks and sounds like this. Now I'm doing it with my mouth open because I want you to hear, but you want to try to do it with your mouth closed all through the nose. So it's reach up on the inhale. And when you come down in that breath, you're letting your arms almost slam onto your sides to force the breath out. And this is a very intense breath. It is almost simulating running or sprinting. And you want to do 20 of those, or maybe even 30 of those. And what you'll find is when you do those, it starts to clear your brain in the same way that if you ran like crazy after a tough workout, everything calms down, doesn't it? And so when you're overthinking and it's moderate to mild, if it's very mild, you can simply just watch it, explore it. It can go away by just getting mindful. When it gets a little bit more intense to the moderate, you can use this 4-7-8 relaxing breath. But when it gets very, very intense, this is when you're not going to be able to control it. It's sort of like a horse that is, going into a full gallop. And so what you want to do is go into a full gallop with it. The billows breath will do that. Now, you can take this even further, what I oftentimes do, which is do something very intense. So sometimes when I get very stressed out, I will take out my mobile device, set it for 1 to 3 minutes, and do something very intense, like push-ups for 1 to 3 minutes. Why is that very intense? Because I can't do push-ups for 3 minutes straight. I have to go as hard as I can, then I have to rest, and I have to go, then I have to rest, and I have to go. It's like a mini workout. And it stimulates my whole sympathetic system and sort of hits reset on my sympathetic system. And then I can go and relax. Burpees will do this. Push-ups will do this. Any intense exercise. You can go get down into a squat and do pulsing squats. Now, if you're someone that's like, well, Jade, I'm not fit enough to do this intense stuff, then the billows breath is the next best thing. Do this breathing technique. And notice when you're exercising, it's one level up because you're breathing hard, but your full body's working. And one of the reasons I like the billows breath is because it's getting some of the body involved. Your arms are involved. You're doing something with that. Very, very important. So those techniques are what you want to be thinking about when you are in a state of overthinking. Those are the techniques that you want to use. 1, mindfulness. Pay attention to the overthinking itch. Go into this place where you observe and you get very curious. Think about what are the choices and patterns that cause this overthinking? What are the stories? Oftentimes when you get very mindful and you're watching and you're just asking, tell me, overthinking, what are you trying to tell me? You'll spot these patterns, right? This is how I spotted my issue with airplane, and this control issue. Now, if it starts to get more moderate, you can do the 4-7-8 relaxing breath. Now, this is where most people stop in their recommendations because they don't understand when you get too sympathetic, too overstimulated, too overthinking, too anxious. At this point, you're being attacked by a lion. And at that point, you need to fight or flight. You need to run. You need to fight. You need to do something intense. That's where the billows breath comes in and the push-ups come in, right? Very important. Now, as we begin to wrap up this podcast, let's talk a little bit about part of the issue in choices versus decisions. Now, I know you probably think a choice and a decision are the same thing, and they almost are exactly the same thing, except for one small distinction. A decision is the process of considerations, right? A choice is simply the act. It's simply making the act. So, for example, if I'm going to make a decision about what I'm going to wear today, I might go, you know what? It's the weather outside is a particular way. It's kind of cold, so I'm going to definitely wear jeans and a long shirt and maybe a sweatshirt on top of that. And I'm not going to wear my flip-flops. I'm definitely going to wear my shoes. Oh, but I'm going out to dinner later, so maybe I'll wear my dress shoes. And I look good in blue, or, my girlfriend, likes this particular shirt. So all that's decisions. A choice is simply, I'm wearing a blue shirt. I'm wearing a blue shirt, period. I make that choice. Now, some people are just very good about making choices because they've made those choices ahead of time. Most people, though, who are overthinkers make decisions. In other words, what they're doing is they don't just simply make the choice. They have to decide every single time. Here's another example. Have you ever gone out with someone or your partner or a friend where you're like, what's on this menu? We're going out to eat. And I know I've been to this exact restaurant with you before. And yet they sit there making decisions. They go, what are you having? Ooh, that sounds good. Gosh, I had that last time. Maybe I'll get this time. Right. And they go through this whole decision process that you're kind of like, look, we've been here before. Why is it taking you 5 minutes to order? Those people tend to be people who overthink because they're making decisions. They want to know what you're getting. They want to know what the waiter or waitress likes. They want to know what's fresh. They want to know all kinds of things before they actually make the choice. Meanwhile, you're like, I come here all the time and I get a chicken salad. That's just what I get. That's the difference. And so the idea here for overthinkers is to look at yourself and go, where is it that I'm constantly making decisions? I'm constantly considering what other people think. I'm constantly considering, is this healthy or not? I'm constantly considering, is this a smart use of my money or not? I'm constantly considering, is this going to be worth it? I'm constantly considering versus I'm choosing. This feels good, so I choose. It's winter. This is what I wear 99% of the time in the winter. We're at a Mexican restaurant. I get fajitas at Mexican restaurants. We're at an Italian restaurant. I get pasta at an Italian restaurant. We're at, a Mediterranean restaurant. I get falafel at a Mediterranean restaurant. Practice making choices. Less decisions, more choices. And this is a practice. And the more you practice just choosing, the less your brain will default to overthinking, because overthinking has become a pattern for you. It has become a habit for you. And especially as you unlock these stories in your childhood development, you'll realize that overthinking is a habit in particular situations for you. And so the final thing I would say here is get very clear for yourself on making choices, taking definitive actions, right? And just practice that. I make a choice, I act. I make a choice, I act. I make a choice, I act. I don't stress, wonder, consider, then stress again, consider. It's act, choose, act. One of the interesting things about this is that there's this old sort of saying, leap and the net will appear. I think this is something that people who overthink buy into. And they go, I'm going to leap and the net will appear. but they know deep down that the net doesn't appear all the time, that you can't just eat whatever you want and remain healthy, that you can't just spend your money how you want and everything's going to be fine. The better approach is to think, I'm going to leap and weave the net as I fall. In other words, you actually do not know and cannot know the right course of action and the right choice to make until you make the first choice. And people who overthink don't quite understand that. They think that if they plan and they think about it, that there'll be no issues once the choice is made. And that is not true. The only way that you will be clear on an outcome is to take the choice towards the outcome. In other words, it's not leap and the net will appear. It's leap and weave the net as you fall. In other words, trust that you can figure it out. And the more you do that, the more you make choices and figure it out, and make choices and take the actions and figure it out, the less you will overthink. And so that's the practice over the long run. So I gave you some acute things to do, some breathing techniques, some mindfulness techniques, some exercise techniques, but also you want to be looking at the patterns and things like that. And you also want to be looking at, how do I make more choices and just get into the habit of being a chooser rather than a decision maker. So hopefully that makes sense. So thanks so much for hanging out on the podcast today, and I will see you at the next episode. You have been listening to the Next Level Human podcast with Dr. Jade Teta. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you subscribe and consider leaving a review. You make the biggest difference when you pass on your lessons and inspire others. That's why reviews like this are so powerful. Your words may be the only ones that resonate for someone else. Please remember, the information in this podcast is for educational purposes only. Always consult your personal physician or therapist before making any lifestyle changes. And finally, thank you for who you are in the world and the difference you make.